The woman appeared on the horizon like a mirage, staggering through the Texas heat with blood staining the sleeve of her torn calico dress. And Ethan Ashford knew immediately that turning her away would haunt him for the rest of his days. He had been mending the fence line near the main road when he spotted her, watching as she stumbled and caught herself against a fence post about 50 yards from where he stood. The sun beat down mercilessly on this late August day in 1878, turning the earth into a furnace and the air into something that shimmered and danced. She wore no hat, and her dark hair had come loose from whatever arrangement it had once held, hanging in tangled waves past her shoulders. Ethan dropped his tools and ran toward her, his boots kicking up dust with each stride. As he drew closer, he could see her lips were cracked and bleeding, her face sunburned and streaked with dirt and what might have been tears. She looked to be in her early 20s, though it was hard to tell through the damage the desert had inflicted upon her. "Please," she whispered as he reached her, her voice raw and desperate. "Water. Just water and a moment to rest. I can work for it, I promise. I can cook and clean and mend. I just need." Her knees buckled, and Ethan caught her before she hit the ground, surprised by how light she felt in his arms, as if the journey had hollowed her out. Her eyes, he noticed, were a striking shade of green, even dulled as they were by exhaustion and dehydration. "Easy now," he said, his own voice rough from a morning spent in silence. "You are safe. I have got you." He carried her toward the main house, a sturdy structure of wood and stone that his father had built 20 years prior, before consumption had taken him and left Ethan to run the ranch at the age of 20. That had been 6 years ago, and in that time, Ethan had turned the Ashford Ranch into one of the most prosperous spreads in this part of Texas, covering nearly 10,000 acres between Hecla and the Brazos River. The woman's head lolled against his chest, and he quickened his pace, worried she might slip into unconsciousness. His housekeeper, Mrs. Porter, looked up from her washing as he mounted the porch steps, her eyes widening at the sight. "Good Lord," she breathed. "What happened to her?" "I do not know yet," Ethan said. "Bring water, cool but not cold, and fetch some broth if we have any left from last night's supper. She needs tending." He carried the woman inside to the parlor, laying her carefully on the horsehair sofa his mother had insisted upon years ago. Mrs. Porter hurried in with a pitcher of water and a clean cloth, and together they managed to get some liquid past the woman's parched lips. She coughed and sputtered, then drank more eagerly, her hands coming up to grip the cup with desperate strength. Slowly, Ethan cautioned, supporting her head. "Too much too fast will make you sick." When she had drunk her fill, she sagged back against the cushions, her eyes fluttering closed. But Ethan could see the tension still holding her body rigid, as if even in her exhaustion she could not allow herself to truly rest. "What is your name?" he asked gently, her eyes opened, focusing on him with difficulty. "Zara," she said. "Zara Lancaster. I am Ethan Ashford. This is my ranch. You are safe here, Miss Lancaster. Nobody will harm you." Something in her expression crumbled at those words, and tears began streaming down her sunburned cheeks. "They are dead," she whispered. "All of them. The Comanche came 3 days ago. My father, my mother, my brother Thomas. Everyone at the settlement. I hid in the root cellar, and when I came out—" She stopped, her breath hitching. "I walked. I just kept walking. I did not know where I was going. I just walked." Ethan felt his chest tighten with sympathy and anger. Raids had been less frequent in recent years, but they still happened, particularly in the more remote settlements where folks thought they could carve out a life away from the established towns. It was a hard land, and it took a particular kind of stubbornness or desperation to try. "Which settlement?" he asked. "My father called it Lancaster's Hope. about 40 miles northeast of here, near the Trinity River. He staked his claim there 5 years ago. Her voice was flat now, drained of emotion. It was just 14 families. We thought we were far enough from the reservation. We thought we would be left alone. Mrs. Porter pressed a cool cloth to Zara's forehead, clucking her tongue sympathetically. Poor child, you have been walking for 3 days in this heat. I lost my canteen the first day. Dropped it when I had to hide from riders. I drank from a creek yesterday, I think, or maybe that was the day before. I cannot remember clearly. The wound on your arm, Ethan said, nodding toward the bloodstain. May I? Zara looked down as if she had forgotten about it entirely. A nail caught me when I was climbing out of the cellar. It is nothing. But when Mrs. Porter carefully peeled back the torn sleeve, they could see the gash was deep and already showing signs of infection, the edges red and swollen. The older woman pursed her lips. This needs proper cleaning and stitching, Mr. Ashford. I will fetch my kit. Over the next hour, they tended to Zara's injuries. She bore the pain of having the wound cleaned and stitched with remarkable stoicism, only flinching slightly when Mrs. Porter drove the needle through. Ethan found himself watching her face, noting the delicate bone structure beneath the damage, the determined set of her jaw. When it was done, and Zara had eaten a little broth and bread, Mrs. Porter showed her to the guest room upstairs. Ethan listened to their footsteps on the floorboards overhead, heard the creak of the bed as Zara lay down, and tried to return his attention to the account books spread across his desk in the study. But his mind kept returning to the woman upstairs, to the devastation in her voice when she spoke of her family's deaths, to the way she had asked only for water and a moment's rest, as if she expected to have to move on immediately after. As if she had no right to more than that. He thought about his own parents, both gone now, and his older sister Margaret, who had married a banker in San Antonio and moved away. He thought about how this house, large as it was, felt empty most days with just himself and Mrs. Porter rattling around in it. He thought about loneliness and grief and the strange ways that life sometimes brought people together. When Mrs. Porter came back downstairs, she found him still sitting at his desk, staring at nothing. She is sleeping, the housekeeper said. Poor thing barely made it under the covers before she was out. I will check on her in a few hours. Mrs. Porter, Ethan said slowly, we have that empty cottage near the east pasture. The one my father built for the foreman before we consolidated everything into the bunkhouse. We do, she agreed, her eyes shrewd. Why do you mention it? It would need some work. New furniture, repairs to the roof, but it could be made comfortable. For Miss Lancaster, Ethan stood and walked to the window, looking out over his land. The ranch stretched as far as he could see in every direction. Thousands of acres of good grazing land, water rights to 2 springs and a substantial portion of the river, hundreds of head of cattle. He had built something substantial here, something lasting. But it meant nothing without people to share it with. She said she can cook and clean and mend, he said. She will want to work, not accept charity, but she has nowhere to go, no family left. If we offer her a position here, a place to stay, wages of her own, then she can rebuild her life. And what will people say? Mrs. Porter asked, though her tone suggested she approved of the plan. A young, unmarried woman living on your property. They will say what they always say, I imagine. But with you here as chaperone, and with Miss Lancaster living in her own cottage rather than in this house, I cannot see that it matters much what the gossips choose to whisper about. You have a kind heart, Mr. Ashford. Your mother would be proud. Ethan turned back from the window. We will discuss it with her when she wakes. I will not push her into anything, but I would like to offer her the option, at least. Zara slept for nearly 16 hours straight, waking only once in the middle of the night when Mrs. Porter coaxed her into drinking more water and eating a little more bread. When she finally emerged the next morning, wearing a borrowed dress that Mrs. Porter had altered to fit, her hair washed and braided, Ethan was struck by how different she looked. The haunted expression was still there in her eyes, and the sunburn on her face would take days to heal, but there was a quiet dignity to her bearing as she descended the stairs. She held her bandaged arm carefully against her side. "Mr. Ashford," she said formally, "I want to thank you for your kindness. I know you have already done more than most would, but I must ask if you know of anyone in the area who might be hiring. I am a hard worker, and I have experience with livestock and crops. I can read and write and do sums. Surely someone needs help." Ethan had been drinking his morning coffee in the dining room, and he gestured for her to sit. "Please, join me for breakfast. We can discuss your situation." She hesitated, then sat, her posture rigid. Mrs. Porter bustled in with a plate of eggs and bacon, along with fresh biscuits and gravy. Zara stared at the food as if she could not quite believe it was real. "Eat," Ethan said gently. "You need your strength." She obeyed, trying at first to eat delicately, but her hunger got the better of her, and soon she was consuming the meal with single-minded focus. Ethan waited until she had finished before speaking again. "Miss Lancaster, I have a proposition for you. I find myself in need of additional help around the ranch. Mrs. Porter manages the house admirably, but there is more work than one person can handle, especially during roundup and branding season when we have extra men to feed. I also need someone to help with the books, as my own head for numbers is adequate but not excellent. The position would include room and board in a private cottage, plus wages of $30 a month." Zara set down her fork carefully. "That is very generous, Mr. Ashford, more than generous, but I have to ask why you would offer such a thing to a stranger." He met her eyes directly. "Because you need help, and I am in a position to provide it. Because I believe people should look out for one another when they can. And because I think you would be an asset to this ranch, if you chose to stay." She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to read his true intentions there. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she gave a small nod. "I accept," she said, "and I promise you will not regret it. I will work harder than anyone you have ever employed." "I do not doubt it," Ethan said, surprised by the warmth that spread through his chest at her words. "But first, you need to heal. That arm needs proper rest, and you need to recover your strength. Mrs. Porter will show you around today, and we will move you into the cottage at the end of the week." Over the following days, Ethan found himself increasingly aware of Zara's presence. She spent most of her time with Mrs. Porter, learning the rhythms of the household and meeting the ranch hands who came to the main house for their meals. She was quiet at first, speaking only when spoken to, but gradually she began to relax, her natural personality emerging like a flower after rain. She had, it turned out, a sharp wit and a quick mind. When Ethan showed her the account books, she spotted several errors he had made in his arithmetic within minutes. When Mrs. Porter showed her the kitchen, she suggested improvements to the organization that made meal preparation more efficient. When one of the hands, a young cowboy named Pete, started coughing badly, she mixed a remedy from herbs she found growing near the house that had him feeling better within a day. But it was the small moments that Ethan found himself treasuring most. The way Zara's face lit up when she saw the horses in the corral for the first time. The sound of her laugh, rare but genuine, when Mrs. Porter told a story about Ethan as a boy. The sight of her in the evening light, standing on the porch and looking out over the land with an expression of something like peace. By the end of the week, when they walked together to inspect the cottage that would become her new home, Ethan had to admit to himself that his feelings toward Zara Lancaster had evolved beyond simple compassion. He found himself thinking about her when he should have been focused on work. He found himself taking extra care with his appearance in the mornings. He found himself looking for excuses to be near her. The cottage was small but well built, with a main room that served as kitchen and sitting area, a separate bedroom, and a loft for storage. The roof did indeed need repairs, and the furniture was minimal, but the bones of the place were sound. "What do you think?" Ethan asked as Zara walked slowly through the space, running her hand along the windowsill. "I think it is perfect," she said softly. "Better than anything I could have hoped for. Mr. Ashford, I do not know how to properly thank you." "Ethan," he said, "please just call me Ethan, and you do not need to thank me. Having you here, seeing this place come alive again, that is thanks enough." She turned to face him, and in the dusty sunlight streaming through the window, her green eyes seemed to glow. "Ethan, then, and you must call me Zara. I feel as though we have moved past formalities." He smiled. "Zara it is." Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into preparing the cottage. He repaired the roof himself, replacing damaged shingles and resealing the joins. He built new furniture in the evenings, working by lamplight in the barn, a sturdy table and chairs, a chest of drawers for the bedroom, shelves for the kitchen. Mrs. Porter contributed curtains and quilts, and some of the ranch hands pitched in to whitewash the walls and repair the front steps. Zara watched the progress with something like wonder in her eyes. "You are doing too much," she protested one afternoon, watching Ethan install the new table. "I could have made do with far less." "I know you could have," he said, testing the table's stability. "But why should you have to make do when we can provide better? I just do not want to be a burden." He straightened and looked at her. "Zara, you are not a burden. You have been here 3 weeks, and already you have reorganized the entire household, corrected months' worth of errors in my bookkeeping, and taught Mrs. Porter 12 new recipes. If anything, I am concerned I am not paying you enough." She blushed, a pretty pink coloring her cheeks, now mostly healed from the sunburn. "I am only doing what I was hired to do." "No," he said quietly. "You are doing far more than that, and we both know it." The air between them felt charged suddenly, full of things unsaid. Zara looked away first, her hands smoothing nervously over her skirt. "I should get back to the house. Mrs. Porter needs help with the evening meal." But as she turned to leave, Ethan caught her hand, surprising them both. "Zara, wait." She froze, looking down at where his hand held hers. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. "Yes." He released her immediately, suddenly unsure of himself. "I just wanted to say that I am glad you stayed, that you are here. I know the circumstances that brought you were terrible, but I am grateful nonetheless." She met his eyes again, and this time she did not look away. "I am grateful too. You gave me more than water and a moment's rest, Ethan. You gave me a reason to keep living when I was not sure I wanted to. That is not something I will forget." After she left, Ethan sat on the new chair and put his head in his hands, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions in his chest. He had been with women before, had even been briefly engaged in his early 20s to a girl from a neighboring ranch, but that relationship had ended amicably when they both realized they felt more friendship than passion. Since then, he had been too busy building the ranch to think much about romance. But what he felt for Zara was different from anything he had experienced before. It was not just attraction, though he would be lying if he said he did not find her beautiful. It was something deeper, a recognition of kindred spirits, a desire not just to be with her but to protect her, to see her happy, to be the person who could make her smile. The realization that he was falling in love with her hit him like a physical blow. Zara moved into the cottage on a warm September morning, carrying her few belongings in a single carpet bag that Mrs. Porter had given her. Ethan had wanted to help, but she had insisted on making the short walk from the main house alone, as if she needed to prove her independence. That evening he knocked on her door with a housewarming gift, a set of books he thought she might enjoy. She answered with flour on her cheek and an apron tied around her waist, and behind her he could see she had been baking, experimenting with the cast iron stove. "I hope I am not disturbing you," he said. "Not at all. Please come in." She stepped aside, wiping her hands on her apron. "I was just trying out the oven. I think the temperature runs a bit hot, but I am learning its quirks." He handed her the books, watching as she examined the titles with delight. Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights and Sense and Sensibility. "Oh, Ethan, these are wonderful. I have not had new books to read in years. I thought you might enjoy them during the quiet evenings." She set the books carefully on the table, treating them like precious treasures. "Would you like to stay for coffee? I just brewed a fresh pot." They sat at the table he had built, drinking coffee and talking as the sun set outside the window. Zara told him more about her life before the raid, about her father's dreams of building a prosperous settlement, about her mother's garden, about her younger brother's ambition to become a lawyer. The grief was still raw in her voice, but there was a kind of peace in the telling, as if sharing the memories helped keep her loved ones alive. Ethan, in turn, told her about his own parents, about the responsibility he had felt taking over the ranch so young, about the loneliness of the last few years. He found himself confiding things he had never told anyone, and she listened with an attention that made him feel truly heard. When he finally stood to leave, it was full dark outside and he realized they had been talking for nearly 3 hours. "I should let you rest," he said reluctantly. She walked him to the door, and in the lamplight her face was soft and lovely. "Thank you for the books, Ethan, and for the company. I did not realize how much I needed it." "Any time," he said, meaning it absolutely. "My door is always open, Zara, for anything you need." She smiled, and it transformed her face, making her look younger, happier. "The same is true for you. I am here if you ever need someone to talk to." As Ethan walked back to the main house under a sky full of stars, he felt lighter than he had in years. The ranch, which had felt like a burden some days, now felt like a gift, because it had brought Zara into his life. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable pattern. Zara worked in the main house during the days, managing the household alongside Mrs. Porter and keeping the books. Ethan ran the ranch, overseeing the hands, checking on the cattle, maintaining the property. But in the evenings after the work was done, they found reasons to be together. Sometimes Ethan would stop by the cottage with a question about the accounts that could easily have waited until morning. Sometimes Zara would bring fresh baked goods to the main house and stay to share them. Sometimes they would go riding together, Zara on a gentle mare named Sunshine that had taken to her immediately, exploring the vast expanse of Ashford land as the autumn air grew crisp and cool. It was on one of these rides in late October that everything changed. They had ridden out to the north pasture to check on a section of fence that Ethan thought might need repairs before winter. The day was beautiful, the sky a brilliant blue, the temperature perfect. Zara had been quieter than usual, and Ethan had let her be, sensing she was working through something in her mind. When they reached a small grove of cottonwoods near a spring-fed pond, they dismounted to let the horses drink. Zara walked to the water's edge, staring out at the reflection of the trees in the still surface. "I have been here 2 months now," she said without turning around. "Has it been that long already?" Ethan joined her by the water. "Time passes quickly. Sometimes it feels like I have been here forever, and sometimes it feels like it has only been days." She picked up a small stone and tossed it into the pond, watching the ripples spread. "I have been thinking about my family a lot lately, about what they would want for me." Ethan waited, sensing there was more she needed to say. "My father always said that life was for the living, that grieving was necessary but dwelling in sorrow was not. He would want me to build a new life, to find happiness again." She turned to face Ethan, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But I feel guilty even thinking about being happy when they are gone." "That is natural," Ethan said gently. "Grief is not something we get over, it is something we learn to carry. But your father was right. They would not want you to stop living. I know that in my head. But my heart is having a harder time accepting it." She took a shaky breath. "Especially because I have been feeling things I did not expect to feel, not so soon after losing everything." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What kind of things?" She met his gaze directly, and he could see the vulnerability there, mixed with a quiet courage. "Hope, joy, the possibility of something new." She paused, then continued in a rush, as if she had to get the words out before she lost her nerve. "Feelings for you, Ethan. Deep feelings that grow stronger every day." His heart felt like it might burst from his chest. "Zara, I have been trying to give you time and space, trying not to push or presume, but I have to tell you that what I feel for you is more than just concern for your well-being. I am in love with you. I think I have been since the day I found you on that road." She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I was so afraid you only saw me as someone who needed saving, that your kindness came from pity." "No," he said fiercely, closing the distance between them. "Never pity. Admiration, yes. Respect, affection, love, but never pity." He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," she whispered. When their lips met, it felt like coming home. The kiss started gentle, tentative, but quickly deepened as 2 months of suppressed longing poured out. Zara's arms went around his neck, and Ethan pulled her closer, careful of her still healing arm but unable to resist the need to hold her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zara was smiling through her tears. "I did not know it could feel like this," she said wonderingly. "This right?" "Neither did I," Ethan admitted. "I thought I knew what love was, but I was wrong. This is what it is supposed to be." They stood there by the pond, holding each other as the sun moved across the sky, making promises with their touches that words would only complicate. When they finally rode back to the ranch, everything had changed, and yet somehow everything felt exactly as it was meant to be. That evening, Ethan asked Zara to have dinner with him in the main house, a proper dinner with the good china and candles. Mrs. Porter, who had clearly seen this coming long before either of them, had acknowledged it, prepared a feast and made herself scarce afterward, retiring to her own quarters with a satisfied smile. Over roasted chicken and vegetables from the kitchen garden, Ethan and Zara talked about their future. They took their time, not rushing, both aware that despite the intensity of their feelings, there were practical matters to consider. "I do not want people to say you married me out of obligation," Zara said, her fingers twining with his across the table, "or that I trapped you somehow." "Anyone who knows me would never believe that," Ethan said, "but I understand your concern. We can take as much time as you need. I am not going anywhere." "I do not want to wait too long either," she admitted. "I have learned that life is precious and uncertain. When you find something real, you should hold on to it. Then we will find the right time," he said. "There is no rush, but there is also no reason to deny ourselves happiness out of fear of what others might think." They courted properly after that, though anyone watching could see how deeply in love they were. Ethan would come to the cottage in the evenings and sit with Zara on her porch, holding her hand and talking about everything and nothing. They continued their rides together, exploring more of the ranch, and Ethan showed her all his favorite spots, the places he went when he needed to think or wanted to feel close to his parents. Zara began to truly bloom during this time. The haunted look faded from her eyes, replaced by a brightness that made Ethan's chest ache with joy. She laughed more easily now, and sometimes he would catch her singing while she worked, old folk songs her mother had taught her. The other ranch hands adored her, charmed by her kindness and impressed by her competence. In November, as the weather turned colder and the first hints of winter appeared, Ethan took Zara back to the pond where they had first kissed. He had spent weeks planning this moment, working on something special in secret. When they arrived, Zara gasped. Someone had cleared away the brush around the spring that fed the pond, revealing that it was more substantial than it had appeared. A genuine well with strong, clear water bubbling up from deep underground. But more than that, Ethan had built a beautiful stone border around it, creating a proper well structure with a roof to keep out debris and a bucket on a rope for drawing water. "Ethan," she breathed, "this is incredible. You did all this." "I had help from some of the hands," he admitted. "But yes, this is my project. Zara, do you remember the day we met? You asked me for water and a moment's rest. I have been thinking about that a lot these past months." He took both her hands in his heart pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "You asked for so little and I wanted to give you everything. This well represents a promise. It will be here long after we are gone, providing water for whoever needs it. It is permanent, lasting, something that cannot be taken away. And that is what I want to offer you." He knelt down on one knee, pulling a ring from his pocket. It had been his grandmother's, a simple gold band with a small emerald that matched Zara's eyes. "Zara Lancaster, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to give you everything you deserve? Will you build a future with me here on this land, make a home and a family and grow old together?" Tears streamed down Zara's face, but she was smiling, radiant with joy. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure despite the tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her, and it felt like sealing a sacred promise. "I love you so much," she said against his lips. "You gave me back my life, Ethan. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a home and purpose and love. I will spend the rest of my days trying to make you as happy as you have made me." "You already do," he assured her, "every single day." They were married on a cold December morning in the small church in Hecla, with Mrs. Porter standing up as matron of honor and Ethan's ranch foreman, a gruff but kind man named Charlie Davis, serving as best man. Zara wore a dress that Mrs. Porter had helped her make from cream-colored silk, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ethan wore his best suit and could not stop smiling the entire ceremony. The preacher, Reverend Matthews, had known Ethan since he was a boy and had initially been skeptical about the quick courtship. But when he saw the way Ethan and Zara looked at each other, exchanging vows with voices full of emotion and certainty, his doubts melted away. This was clearly a marriage built on genuine love and mutual respect. After the ceremony, they held a reception at the ranch. All the hands attended, along with neighbors from surrounding properties and many of the townsfolk from Hecla. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and Ethan felt his heart might burst with happiness as he danced with his new wife under strings of lanterns hung in the barn. "Are you happy?" he asked her as they swayed together, her head resting against his chest. "More than I ever thought I could be again," she said honestly. "I know my family would have loved you, Ethan. My father would have appreciated how hard you work and how fairly you treat your men. My mother would have loved your kindness. And Thomas would have followed you around asking a million questions about running a ranch." "I wish I could have known them," Ethan said, his hand gentle on her back. "They are part of me and I am part of you now, so in a way you do know them." She lifted her head to look at him. "And maybe someday we can honor their memory by telling our own children about them." "I would like that very much," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. That night, Ethan carried Zara over the threshold of the main house, which was now officially her home. She had moved her few belongings from the cottage the day before, and her books now sat on the shelf in the parlor next to his, their lives beginning to intertwine in tangible ways. In the privacy of their bedroom, they came together with a tenderness and passion that felt sacred. Ethan was gentle, aware that this was new for Zara, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and cherished. And Zara, despite her inexperience, met him with an openness and trust that took his breath away. "I love you," she whispered in the darkness afterward, her head on his shoulder, her hand over his heart. "I love you too," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "More than words can say." Life as a married couple settled into a rhythm that felt natural and right. Zara took over more of the household management, working alongside Mrs. Porter to run the domestic side of the ranch with impressive efficiency. She also became more involved in the business side, her mathematical skills proving invaluable when it came to negotiating cattle prices and managing the ranch's finances. But more than that, she brought warmth and life to the house that had been missing for so long. She filled the rooms with flowers from the garden in spring and summer. She cooked meals that brought the hands running when the dinner bell rang. She created a sense of home that made the ranch feel like more than just a business, but a real family. Ethan fell more in love with her every day. The way she hummed while she cooked, the way she looked at him across the dinner table as if he were the most important person in the world. The way she challenged him when she disagreed with his decisions, never afraid to speak her mind. The way she fit perfectly in his arms at night. In the spring of 1879, Zara discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening after dinner, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. "There is a new life growing here," she said, her eyes shining. "Our child, due sometime in October, I think." Ethan's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He pulled her into his arms, his own eyes wet with tears. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though she must have been able to feel his joy radiating from him. "I am beyond happy. I am overwhelmed with gratitude. You have given me so much, Zara, more than I ever dreamed of having." She laughed and kissed him. "You act as if you had nothing to do with this. You know what I mean. You brought love back into my life. You made this house a home. And now you are giving me the gift of a family." "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," she corrected. "That day when I stumbled onto your property, dying of thirst and exhaustion, neither of us knew where it would lead. But I think maybe it was always meant to happen this way." As Zara's pregnancy progressed, Ethan became almost comically protective. He did not want her lifting anything heavy or riding horses, or doing any of the harder household chores. Zara tolerated his fussing with good-natured patience, though she drew the line at some of his more extreme suggestions. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she informed him when he tried to insist she spend the entire day resting. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still managing to get work done. I am not going to sit idle for 9 months." But she did accept his help more often, and she let him rub her feet when they swelled. and she allowed him to read to her in the evenings from those books he had given her when she first moved into the cottage. They talked about names and made plans for converting one of the upstairs rooms into a nursery. Mrs. Porter knitted tiny sweaters and blankets, her needles clicking away in the evenings. The ranch hands, most of them rough men who spent their days with cattle and horses, became surprisingly invested in Zara's well-being, always asking how she was feeling and offering to help with tasks. In October, on a cool autumn evening very similar to the one when Zara had first arrived at the ranch, she went into labor. Ethan sent one of the hands racing into Hecla to fetch the doctor, while he and Mrs. Porter helped Zara through the early stages. The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the next day, and Ethan aged years in those hours, holding Zara's hand and feeling helpless in the face of her pain. But finally, as the sun was setting on what had been the longest day of Ethan's life, a baby's cry pierced the air. The doctor, a competent older woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who had recently moved to the area, held up a squirming, red-faced infant. "You have a son," she announced with a smile. Ethan looked down at Zara, exhausted but radiant, tears streaming down her face. "A boy," she breathed. "We have a son." The doctor cleaned the baby and wrapped him in one of Mrs. Porter's hand-knit blankets, then placed him in Zara's arms. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at the tiny person they had created together. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were the deep blue of all newborns, but Ethan was certain they would eventually turn green like his mother's. "He is perfect," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Zara asked, gently touching the baby's tiny hand with her finger. The baby gripped it instinctively, holding on with surprising strength. They had discussed names, but somehow none of them had felt quite right. Now, looking at his son, Ethan knew exactly what he wanted to call him. "Thomas," he said, "after your brother, if that is all right with you." Fresh tears spilled down Zara's cheeks. "Thomas Ashford." "Oh, Ethan, yes, that is exactly right." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Thomas was a healthy baby but demanded constant attention, and both Ethan and Zara stumbled through the learning curve of first-time parents. Mrs. Porter helped when she could, but she was getting older now and could not take on too much. Ethan discovered reserves of patience he did not know he had, walking the floor with Thomas in the middle of the night when the baby would not settle, singing old songs his own mother had sung to him. Zara nursed the baby and marveled at the miracle of it all, this new life they had brought into the world. As Thomas grew, his personality began to emerge. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, fascinated by everything around him. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's determined chin. By his first birthday, he was walking, getting into everything and keeping everyone on their toes. The years passed in a blur of activity and joy. The ranch continued to prosper under Ethan's management and Zara's financial acumen. They made improvements to the property, added more cattle, hired additional hands. The cottage where Zara had first lived alone was converted into housing for a married couple they employed, a young pair named Jack and Emma Thompson, who helped manage the daily operations. When Thomas was 3, Zara became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she knew what to expect. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1883. A tiny thing with a full head of golden hair that neither parent could quite account for, until Ethan remembered his mother had been blonde. They named her Clara Rose, Clara after Ethan's mother and Rose after Zara's. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, though he had to be reminded to be gentle. "She is so small," he would say in wonder, carefully touching her hand. Was I that small? You were, Zara assured him. And now look how big you have gotten. Clara will grow too, and then you will have someone to play with. Life continued to be full and rich. Thomas started learning his letters under Zara's patient instruction. Clara grew from an infant into a toddler who seemed determined to get into as much mischief as humanly possible. The ranch hands doted on both children, and it was not uncommon to see one of the rough cowboys giving a child a ride on his shoulders or teaching them to rope a fence post. Ethan and Zara's love for each other only deepened with time. They still made time for evening rides when they could, leaving the children with Mrs. Porter or the Thompsons, needing those moments alone to reconnect. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They still looked at each other across crowded rooms and smiled, sharing private jokes and tender memories. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Zara back to the well he had built. It had become a special place for them, and they tried to visit it together at least a few times a year. The cottonwoods had grown fuller, providing more shade, and someone had planted wildflowers around the base of the well that bloomed in cheerful profusion each spring. "You remember the day I proposed?" Ethan asked, his arm around Zara's waist as they stood looking at the well. "Of course I do. I remember every detail, the way the light caught the water, the way your hands shook when you pulled out the ring, the way my heart felt like it would burst out of my chest." "Mine too," he admitted. "I was terrified you would say no. I could never have said no. You had already given me everything I needed to say yes. You had given me safety and purpose and love. The proposal was just making official what we both already knew." Ethan turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "You gave me just as much, you know. More, probably. Before you came, this ranch was successful, but it was just a business. You made it a home. You gave me a family. You made every day worth living." "We saved each other," Zara said simply. "That is what love does. We were both lost in our own ways, and we found each other." They stood there in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Then Zara spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "I still think about them sometimes, you know. My first family, I still miss them. But the grief does not consume me any more like it did at first. It is just part of who I am now, part of my story, and I think they would be happy for me, seeing the life I have built." "I am sure they would be," Ethan said. "You honor their memory by living fully, by finding joy again. That is the greatest tribute you could give them." "I used to feel guilty about being happy," Zara admitted. "But I realize now that happiness is not something we have to earn or deserve. It is just a gift we have to be brave enough to accept." In 1885, their 3rd child was born, another boy they named James William. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's quick mind, and from the moment he could talk, he asked endless questions about everything. Thomas, now 6, took his role as big brother seriously, while 4-year-old Clara was just delighted to have someone new to boss around. The ranch house, once so empty and quiet, now rang with the sounds of children's laughter, of running feet on the stairs, of debates over toys and treats. Mrs. Porter, now in her late 60s, had officially retired from her duties but still lived on the property and spent her days spoiling the grandchildren, as she called them. Ethan sometimes stood in the doorway of the parlor in the evenings, watching Zara read to the children or help them with a puzzle, and had to pinch himself to believe this was his life. The lonely rancher who had once rattled around in this big house had been replaced by a husband and father, surrounded by love and noise and chaos, and everything that made life worth living. As the 1880s progressed, changes came to Texas and to Hecla. The railroad expanded, bringing new opportunities for cattle sales, but also bringing more people and more development. The tensions with Native Americans in the region had largely resolved, though not always in ways that Ethan found just or fair. The frontier was slowly becoming more civilized, for better and worse. Through it all, the Ashford Ranch remained a constant, a place of stability and prosperity. Ethan and Zara made sure to give back to the community, donating to the church and the school, helping neighbors in times of trouble, employing people fairly and treating them with respect. Thomas grew into a bright, capable boy who loved working with the horses. Clara was fierce and independent, already declaring she was going to run the ranch someday, much to everyone's amusement and admiration. James was the studious one, more interested in books than cattle, and Zara encouraged his love of learning. In 1888, when Thomas was 9, Clara 7, and James 3, Zara announced she was pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, and Dr. Chen insisted on more rest and caution. Ethan was beside himself with worry, but Zara remained calm. "Women do this all the time," she reminded him. "I will be fine, we will be fine." And she was right. In the spring of 1889, twin girls were born, identical in every way, with blonde hair like Clara and green eyes like their mother. They named them Lily Mee and Daisy June, and the ranch house became even more chaotic and wonderful with 5 children running around. The twins were easier babies than their siblings had been, perhaps because Ethan and Zara were experienced parents by now. Or perhaps they were just naturally calm. Either way, they fit into the family seamlessly, and their older siblings adored them. One evening, when the twins were about 6 months old and the house had finally quieted down, Ethan found Zara sitting in a rocking chair by the window, looking out at the darkening sky. He sat beside her, taking her hand. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. She smiled. "I was just thinking about that day I stumbled onto your property. 11 years ago now. I was so scared and alone and hopeless. If someone had told me then that this would be my life, I would not have believed them." "I would not have believed it either," Ethan admitted. "I thought I was rescuing you that day, but really we rescued each other." 5 children, Zara said wonderingly. 5. Sometimes I look at them and cannot quite believe they are all ours. "We certainly have our hands full," Ethan agreed with a laugh, "but I would not change a thing." "Neither would I." "Well, maybe I would appreciate a full night's sleep now and then," she amended with a grin. "But otherwise, no. This life is more than I ever dreamed of." The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. The children grew, each developing their own interests and personalities. Thomas, true to his early love of horses, became an excellent rider and began helping seriously with the ranch work by the time he was a teenager. Clara did indeed show an aptitude for management and business, often sitting with Ethan to learn about running the operation. James, as predicted, proved to be more academically inclined. He devoured every book he could get his hands on and talked constantly about going to university someday. Ethan and Zara encouraged this dream, proud of their son's intelligence and curious mind. The twins, Lily and Daisy, were inseparable and seemed to communicate in their own private language. They were sweet-natured girls who loved animals and spent hours in the barn helping care for the horses and the barn cats. As the children grew older and more independent, Ethan and Zara found more time for themselves again. They took up their evening rides once more, exploring the ranch that had changed and grown so much over the years. They talked about everything, from the children's futures to ranch business to their own dreams and memories. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked one evening as they sat by the well, now 15 years after he had proposed. Staying here with me instead of rebuilding somewhere else, starting completely fresh. Zara looked at him incredulously. Regret it? Ethan, how could you even ask that? This place, you, our children, this life we have built together, it is everything to me. I have never regretted a single moment. I just wanted to make sure, he said. I know it was not always easy, especially in the early years. I wanted to give you the world, but sometimes all I could offer was hard work and hope. That was more than enough, she said firmly. You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again. You gave me a family to replace the one I lost. But more than that, you gave me myself back. You helped me remember how to hope and dream and live. That is worth more than all the riches in the world. He pulled her close, kissing her temple. I love you, Zara, more now than even on the day I married you, which I would not have thought possible. Love grows, she said. That is what I have learned. It is not a finite resource that gets used up. It expands and deepens and changes, becoming richer with time and shared experiences. What we have now is built on years of partnership and trust and choosing each other every single day. As they sat there together, watching the stars come out, Ethan thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first day when a desperate, wounded woman had asked only for water and a moment's rest, to this evening when they sat together as partners in every sense, bound by love and history and the family they had created. He had given her a well, a symbol of something permanent and life-giving. But she had given him so much more. She had given him purpose and joy and a reason to wake up grateful every morning. She had turned his house into a home and his lonely existence into a life rich with meaning. The well still stood as it had for 15 years, providing water for the ranch and any travelers who passed through. But it also stood as a testament to what could grow from a simple act of kindness, from choosing compassion over indifference, from opening your heart to possibility. By the time the 1890s arrived, the Ashford Ranch was one of the most respected properties in the region. Thomas was now in his early 20s and had taken on significant responsibility for the daily operations. He had grown into a fine young man, tall and capable, with his mother's green eyes and his father's strong work ethic. Clara, at 19, had proven she was serious about her ambitions. She had a head for business that rivaled her mother's, and she had begun experimenting with new breeding techniques for the cattle that were showing promising results. Several neighboring ranchers had already approached her for advice, a fact that filled both her parents with pride. James, at 16, had indeed won a scholarship to a university back east. He would be leaving in the fall to study law, fulfilling the dream that Zara's brother Thomas had never had the chance to pursue. The day he left was bittersweet, with tears from everyone, but also pride and excitement for his future. The twins, now 11, were still inseparable but beginning to develop their own distinct personalities. Lily showed an interest in medicine, particularly after helping Dr. Chen with a minor emergency on the ranch. Daisy was proving to be an artist, sketching everything she saw with remarkable talent. Ethan, now in his late 40s, had aged well. There was gray at his temples and lines around his eyes, but he was still strong and vital, still capable of putting in a full day's work. Zara, at 43, was as beautiful to him as she had been the day they married. Her hair, which she now wore in a simple knot at the back of her head, had threads of silver running through it, but her eyes were still bright, her mind still sharp, her spirit still strong. They had weathered storms together, both literal and figurative. There had been harsh winters and drought years, cattle diseases and market fluctuations, injuries and close calls. But through it all, they had faced everything together, their partnership unshakable. One evening, as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a family dinner, Thomas stood up to make a toast. All the children were there, including James, who had come home for the occasion, along with Mrs. Porter, now in her 80s but still sharp as a tack, and many of the ranch hands who had become like extended family. "To my parents," Thomas said, raising his glass. "You built more than a ranch here. You built a legacy of love and hard work and integrity. You showed us what a true partnership looks like, what it means to honor your commitments and care for your family and your community. Everything we are, everything we will become, we owe to your example." To Ethan and Zara Ashford. To Ethan and Zara, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. Zara, tears streaming down her face, stood and kissed her son's cheek. Then she turned to Ethan, who stood and took her hand. 20 years, she said softly, so only he could hear. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "As would I," he replied. "Here is to 20 more." They kissed, and their children cheered, and Ethan felt a contentment so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was what he had been meant for. Not just running a ranch, but building a family, creating a home, loving this remarkable woman who had stumbled into his life asking only for the bare minimum, and received instead a lifetime of devotion. The party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. The children performed a skit they had secretly rehearsed, reenacting in comedic fashion the story of how their parents met, complete with Thomas doing a dramatic interpretation of Zara stumbling through the desert. Even Ethan and Zara laughed until their sides hurt, seeing their history reflected back through their children's loving, if slightly mocking, eyes. As the years rolled on into the new century, the Ashford family continued to thrive. Thomas married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch, and they had children of their own, making Ethan and Zara grandparents. Clara took over more and more of the ranch management, her innovations helping to keep the property profitable even as the cattle industry changed. James became a successful lawyer, but he never forgot his roots, coming home regularly and always making time for his family. The twins both went on to pursue their respective interests, Lily studying medicine and Daisy attending an art school. Through it all, Ethan and Zara remained at the center, the heart of the family. They were the ones everyone came to for advice or comfort, the ones who hosted the big holiday gatherings, the ones whose love story had become legend not just in their family but in the whole community. People in Hecla still talked about the rancher who had found a dying woman on the road and given her not just water and rest, but a whole new life. They talked about the well he had built and the way it had become a symbol of hospitality and hope. Travelers still stopped there for water, and they always left commenting on the beauty of the place and the sense of peace it inspired. As Ethan and Zara grew older, they began to slow down, letting the younger generation take over more of the work. They spent their days in quieter pursuits now, gardening together, reading, playing with their grandchildren, taking gentle rides around the property they loved. One spring afternoon, when Ethan was 65 and Zara 60, they sat together on the porch of the main house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas's children were chasing the twins' children around, their laughter filling the air. Clara was in the barn with her own children, teaching them about the horses. "We did well," Zara said, her hand in Ethan's. "We did," he agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible. Do you remember what I said that first day, that I could work for my keep, that I just needed a chance?" "I remember everything about that day," Ethan said. "You were the bravest person I had ever seen, willing to keep going even when you had lost everything." "I had not lost everything," Zara corrected gently. "I had just not found you yet. My first family was taken from me, and I will always carry that grief. But this family, the one we built together, it is proof that life can surprise you, that even in the darkest moments, there can be hope for something beautiful ahead. Ethan lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. You asked for water and a moment's rest. I gave you a well and a lifetime, but you gave me so much more in return. You gave me everything that matters. We gave each other everything, Zara said. That is how love works. It is not about one person rescuing another. It is about two people choosing to build something together, day after day, year after year. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin to set over the land they had worked and loved for so many years. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and beautiful, a testament to their labor and dedication. But more than that, it was full of life and love, full of the family they had created together. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ethan thought about that well he had built so many years ago, how it had symbolized his promise to Zara. The well still stood, still provided water, still served its purpose. But the real legacy was not the well itself. It was this family, these children and grandchildren, this love that had grown and expanded and touched so many lives. He had started with nothing but a ranch and a lonely existence. She had arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate need. Together, they had built an empire of love, a dynasty of kindness, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And as they sat there together, hands intertwined, hearts beating in sync after decades of partnership, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that finding Zara Lancaster on that dusty road had been the greatest blessing of his life. She had asked for so little. He had tried to give her everything. But in the end, they had given each other something even more valuable than land or wealth or security. They had given each other a lifetime of love, and that was worth more than all the water in all the wells in Texas. Years continued to pass peacefully for the Ashford family. Ethan and Zara grew old together gracefully, their love never diminishing even as their bodies grew more frail. They celebrated 40 years of marriage surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch prospered under Clara's management, with Thomas working alongside her to ensure the property remained successful and sustainable. On warm evenings, when their health permitted, Ethan and Zara would still take a wagon ride out to the well. It had become a sacred place for them, the spot where their future had been promised and sealed. They would sit there, holding hands, remembering all the moments that had brought them to where they were. You have any regrets? Zara asked one evening, echoing the question Ethan had asked her decades earlier. Not a single one, he said without hesitation. Every decision I made, every moment we shared, all of it led to this. How could I regret any of it? When Ethan was 72, he fell ill with pneumonia. Despite Dr. Chen's best efforts and the care of his devoted family, he did not recover. On a quiet morning in early spring, with Zara holding his hand and all his children gathered around his bed, he passed peacefully. His last words were to Zara. "Thank you," he whispered, "for saying yes, for staying, for loving me, for everything. Thank you for finding me," she whispered back through her tears, "for seeing me when I was lost, for giving me a lifetime when I asked for only a moment." The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Texas. People came from all over to pay their respects to the man who had built not just a successful ranch, but a reputation for fairness, generosity, and integrity. They told stories about Ethan's kindness, his wisdom, his unwavering devotion to his family and community. Zara grieved deeply, but not despairingly. She had loved Ethan for over 40 years, and while she missed him with every fiber of her being, she also knew how fortunate they had been. They had been given more time together than many couples ever got, and they had made the most of every moment. She lived for another 8 years after Ethan's passing, staying active and involved with the ranch and the family. She delighted in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and about the day she had stumbled onto Ashford land asking for water. When her time came, she went peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, in the bed she had shared with Ethan for so many years. Her children found her in the morning, a peaceful smile on her face, her hand resting on Ethan's pillow as if reaching for him even in death. They buried her next to Ethan on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the well he had built for her. On her headstone, beneath her name and dates, they carved a simple inscription that Thomas had suggested. She asked for water and a moment's rest. He gave her a well and a lifetime. Together, they built a legacy of love. The well still stands today, maintained by generations of Ashfords who understand its significance. It still provides water to anyone who needs it, a symbol of hospitality and hope that has endured for over a century. And the ranch still operates, passed down through the family, a testament to what can be built when two people choose love over fear, generosity over selfishness, and commitment over convenience. The story of Ethan and Zara became legend in Hecla and the surrounding area, told and retold by parents to children, by grandparents to grandchildren. It became a story about the power of kindness, about how a simple act of compassion can change the course of multiple lives. It became a story about love that endures beyond death, about partnership that creates something lasting and meaningful. And somewhere, beyond the veil that separates this life from whatever comes after, Ethan and Zara are together again, their love eternal and unshakable, finally reunited after their brief separation. They can look back on the life they built together with satisfaction and joy, knowing that they made the most of the gift they were given, knowing that their love created ripples that will continue to spread through generations yet to come. The well remains, water flowing clear and pure, a permanent reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the simplest acts of human kindness, and that a moment of compassion can truly last a lifetime.